Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are setting the scene in a place and time that was already just overwhelmed by tragedy. South Central Los Angeles, 1984.
Yeah, this was a community defined by crisis, really. And in that crisis, a silent, terrifying figure began to operate.
And we're going to examine how that environmental chaos, that noise really,
Yeah.
it provided the perfect cover for a serial predator.
We are peeling back the layers on the initial brutal phase of what became one of the most notorious and longest-running serial killer cases in American history.
It's crucial right at the start to understand the names because the names themselves tell the story of the investigation.
They really do. When this series of murders began, they were often dismissed, by some investigators, by the public, as just a man killing prostitutes.
Right, not a serial killer, just, street violence.
Exactly. Then when the pattern finally solidified, the media and the task force dubbed him the South Side Slayer.
And that famous name, the one we all know now, the Grim Sleeper, that didn't come about until much, much later.
Years later, after the case had gone stone cold for 13 years.
So our mission today is to understand that initial period, the Southside Slayer era, and to trace that path from, these isolated, neglected homicides to a confirmed serial killing pattern.
Precisely. And not just the timeline, but how these systemic pressures, the explosion of the crack epidemic, the soaring rate of violence, and this just devastating societal perception of the victims, how all of that allowed this person to operate for nearly 5 years with almost no public scrutiny.
It's about the difficult, frustrating journey to find a pattern when the community already felt, and I mean profoundly felt, that their lives just weren't valued. I have to start with this quote from someone who grew up there. It sets the tone for everything. She said, "I grew up in the south of Los Angeles in the early 80s. We all knew that there was a woman murderer out there."
Wow.
Imagine that. Growing up, knowing a predator is actively hunting in your streets, but no one in power, no one on the news is even talking about him.
That silence.
That silence, that feeling of being completely ignored, that's where we have to begin.
To understand the failure to catch the Southside Slayer early, you just have to understand the environment of South Central Los Angeles in the mid-1980s.
Okay, so let's unpack this environment. Because the level of violence here wasn't just a factor, it was like the essential camouflage for the killer.
It really was. The mid-80s marked the incredibly rapid and devastating rise of crack cocaine.
And this wasn't some gradual shift, right? I mean, this fundamentally reshaped the social and economic fabric of the community almost overnight.
The effects were just instantaneous and chaotic. Crack offered, these quick fortunes to dealers, which drove intense turf wars.
While at the same time creating this widespread addiction among a population that was already so economically vulnerable.
Right. And it resulted in this incredibly dangerous environment where life felt cheap and unpredictable. The whole community structure, family units, the local economy, it was all destabilized by this one substance.
And the atmosphere of violence was just astronomical. I mean, the source material highlights how completely overwhelmed the city was.
Yeah, it was an endemic violence problem that had absolutely nothing to do with the serial killer we're focused on.
But it gave him the perfect cover to operate. The murder rate in South LA was climbing so fast that by the 90s, the overall LA murder rate was soaring to over 1,000 deaths per year.
And when you have that kind of scale, 1,000 homicides a year, the logistical challenge for law enforcement becomes almost insurmountable.
You can't keep up.
You can't. Police resources are finite. Your homicide detectives, who should be doing this meticulous long-term pattern analysis, are instead just cycling through fresh homicide calls every single day.
Just trying to keep their heads above water.
Exactly. The system was focused on managing volume, not solving these complex, interconnected serial cases.
That distinction is so important. When violence is that intense, the sheer volume of death made it almost impossible for investigators to distinguish one killing from another.
Or to isolate a specific serial pattern in the middle of all the background noise of the crack wars.
And this leads directly to the issue of the invisible victims.
It does. Etched into this crisis was the grim reality of who the victims were. Young black women, found dead on streets, in abandoned houses and alleys.
So when you have so many women dying who might be involved in sex work or drug use, how does an investigator even start?
Well, initially they really struggled. They didn't know if they were looking at domestic disputes or rival gang stuff, pimp-related violence,
or the work of a single predator.
Right. It all just blended into the background noise. And in those early days, that noise was absolutely deafening.
So the victims, because of their tragic circumstances, were sort of categorized away from the typical missing person narrative that usually gets immediate public alarm.
Precisely. And this brings us to the devastating impact on the families and their just acute sense of systemic neglect.
For the families of these women, the feeling was overwhelming. It was that their lives and the lives of their loved ones were seen as disposable.
Secondary casualties of the drug crisis.
Rochelle Johnson, who was the daughter of one of the victims, Henrietta Wright, she speaks so powerfully to this. She said she felt that if the victims had been of a different skin color or from Beverly Hills,
the killer would have been caught sooner?
much sooner. And that's not just grief talking. That's an observation of how institutions prioritize things.
It's a crucial insight into how the perceived status of a victim can fundamentally handicap an investigation. The feeling in the community was that Black lives were considered worthless if they were involved in drugs or sex work.
Which so many were, because of the economic desperation of the time.
Of course. And this created a kind of institutional tunnel vision that prioritized solving crimes against, perceived innocent or upstanding members of society.
Leaving these women in the tragic category of the expected casualties.
Exactly.
But wait, if the investigators did secretly form a task force, which we're going to get to, doesn't that suggest that at least some part of the LAPD cared?
That's a powerful question, and the answer, I think, lies in visibility and outcome. While, individual detectives or a dedicated task force may have cared deeply, the institutional response was slow, it was secretive, and ultimately it was unsuccessful.
So the lack of public warnings, the lack of real media coverage?
And the fact that the killer operated for years without being caught, it all just confirmed the family's suspicions. If he'd been caught quickly, the story would be different. But he wasn't.
And the lack of priority was proven by the result.
The failure to stop the killings.
That sentiment just sticks with you, that feeling of being hunted, but no one is raising the alarm. The daughter's words just capture it all. They thought we were crack addicts, but we were still human beings.
That neglect creates the perfect operational environment for a serial killer, an environment of silence and dismissal.
It allowed the Southside Slayer to be invisible, operating in plain sight, because the victims she chose were already rendered invisible by society.
And that invisibility is the key factor in how long this case went on. When a victim population is deemed less important, the killer, by extension, gains a kind of immunity from the scrutiny that usually brings these cases to a close.
So this context isn't just background.
No, it's the reason this investigation stumbled and eventually went cold so spectacularly.
Despite all that confusion and systemic dismissal, eventually a pattern did emerge. And it wasn't because of a witness or some obvious clue.
No, it was due to a terrifying, shared forensic detail. The common denominator was a single weapon, a small, easily concealable .25 caliber pistol.
But before we get to the ballistics, we have to talk about the women whose deaths, provided the tragic foundation for this. Let's start with Henrietta Wright.
Known to her family as Cody, a mother of 5.
Henrietta's story is just heartbreaking because it's a direct reflection of what the crack epidemic did to a vibrant life. I mean, she was beloved, vivacious, funny.
Before the crisis, she was ambitious. She worked at a school, she loved playing billia, the type of billiards, and even won trophies.
Family life was central to her. Holidays, birthdays, all of it was a big deal.
But the sources say her life took a sharp, sudden downward turn. A severe house fire destroyed her home, and she had to completely start over.
The emotional and financial stress must have been immense.
It was. She became pregnant, was devastated by the circumstances, and sadly began using drugs. She eventually quit her job at the school.
And the cocaine addiction just took over, pulling her into that risky environment that the killer targeted.
And that's where he found her. She was sexually assaulted and killed by a single bullet from that small .25 caliber pistol.
And what made the case so difficult for investigators right from the start?
Well, the crime scene itself presented multiple serious challenges. Crucially, no shell casings were found.
Okay, so .25 automatic ejects a casing, right?
It does. And finding none strongly suggested she was shot somewhere else, and her body was immediately dumped in a secluded location.
A tactic designed to erase evidence and eliminate witnesses.
Completely. And for the family, they were left with this terrible false narrative for years. They believed the initial theory that she'd been killed for stealing drugs from someone.
An unimaginable layer of trauma. Believing her death was a consequence of her addiction, not a random act of violence.
It hid the cold, random nature of a serial killer from them for a very long time.
And just a few months later, the second key victim appeared, Barbara Ware.
Barbara Ware was similarly charismatic, loved roller skating, But like Henrietta, her life went bad after the sudden death of her mother from an aneurysm.
Grief, instability, desperation. It led her to the streets and to cocaine.
She was found in an alley on Main Street, and this is where the investigation got a huge piece of information.
The 911 call.
An anonymous 911 call from a man who said he had just seen a guy dumping a body. He described the vehicle as a blue and white van and even gave the license plate number.
And when police arrived, they found her. She'd been shot with a small caliber weapon.
And this is the moment. The medical examiner gets Barbara Ware's body, and through ballistics, they discover she was shot in the chest with the same .25 caliber pistol as Henrietta Wright.
So it wasn't the victim profiles, which were so tragically similar. It was the weapon itself.
Absolutely. The weapon was the killer's true signature. And this initial discovery led investigators to connect the bullets from Henrietta and Barbara to two earlier unsolved murders.
That's right. Sharon, killed in January 1984, and Deborah Jackson, killed in August 1985.
Ballistics confirmed it. The same .25 caliber weapon was used in all four murders.
So by the fourth murder, they absolutely knew they had a serial killer on their hands.
Let's talk about the forensics here for a second.
Yeah.
The .25 caliber is a low-velocity, easily concealable weapon, a pocket pistol.
Right.
And for linking, that small caliber meant the bullets often kept their shape inside the body, which was crucial for matching the markings, the striations, left by the barrel.
So this tiny weapon became the only consistent piece of hard evidence they had.
In a city drowning in the noise of larger caliber gang-related gun violence, yes, this is their thread.
And that must have been a terrifying moment for the task force. They realize they have a serial killer, and almost immediately he escalates.
He does. Bernita Sparks was the fifth confirmed victim. She was found in a dumpster behind a church, also sexually assaulted, also shot with the .25.
But her case showed a frightening evolution in his behavior.
A huge one. It suggested he was getting bolder, or maybe spending more time with his victims. Her body had been redressed, and she'd suffered a significant blow to the head.
What does that tell profilers, the redressing and the head trauma?
It indicates a couple of things about his MO. First, the attacks were accelerating, happening in shorter and shorter intervals. That shows growing confidence, maybe compulsion.
And the redressing?
That suggests he was taking more time with the victim after death, engaging in some form of ritualistic or organizational behavior. He wasn't just dumping a body anymore, he was staging the scene.
Which is a huge leap in confidence and control.
And this spike in activity, this confirmed pattern, is what solidified that local media nickname, the South Side Slayer.
The popular narrative often says the police just didn't care. But the reality is, it's more complex.
It is. A secret LAPD task force had been investigating the murders of young African-American women since 1985. They were trying to find the common thread among what was initially more than 25 open homicides.
That's a crucial distinction. They saw the problem, but their inability to solve it quickly, and the need to keep the task force secret to avoid panic, it led to this intense negative press.
And the understandable belief that the police just weren't trying. That task force, focusing on every murder with a .25 caliber, was just overwhelmed from the start.
And they faced one frustrating dead end after another, wasting so much time and so many resources.
We have to look at two major leads that just consumed their efforts and then collapsed spectacularly. First, the church van lead from Barbara Ware's murder.
Right. The anonymous caller gave them a specific license plate. They tracked it to a blue and white van owned by the Cosmopolitan Church in South LA. A fantastic, concrete lead.
It seemed like it. It offered the immediate promise of an ID. When police got to the church, the van was still warm. A meeting was going on inside.
So they detained several church members, brought them in for questioning, seized the van.
But it evaporated very quickly and depressingly for the detectives. The church members explained they used the van strictly for community outreach.
Picking up and dropping off parishioners, many of whom were struggling with addiction or poverty.
So the van was used constantly. Forensics found no link to Barbara Ware. Every fingerprint belonged to a known, cleared church member.
Another frustrating coincidence, a dead end.
A complete dead end. And after that failure, the search continued for 3 years. And then came the lead that gave the families this temporary, overwhelming hope. The focus on Jimmy Spencer.
This wasn't a forensic lead. This came from an eyewitness tip.
That's right. A woman named Shelley Brown, arrested for robbery. She claimed she had information about Henrietta Wright's murder, hoping to trade it for a lighter sentence.
And she told police she and Henrietta had been with two men, Dennis Pinkney and Jimmy Spencer, at a hotel.
She claimed she heard a fight, saw Pinckney holding Henrietta down in an alley, and then heard the gunshot.
Based on that, police get a warrant for Spencer's house, and they find a .05 caliber pistol.
You can just imagine the adrenaline in that task force office. After 3 years of nothing, they have a suspect, an eyewitness, a motive, stolen drugs, linking back to the family's original belief in a weapon of the right caliber.
So Jimmy Spencer was arrested and charged with Henrietta's murder. Hope just surged through the community.
It was a massive moment of relief.
Yeah.
Detectives felt they could finally tell everyone they had caught the Southside Slayer. They held press conferences, assuring the public the threat was over.
But that relief was just brutally crushed.
Utterly. By a devastating blow that proved the limits of their investigation and the extent of their mistake.
The murder of Mary Lowe.
Yes. While Jimmy Spencer is sitting in custody, charged with serial murder, a new body is found. Mary Lowe was well known, a dancer for American Bandstand and Soul Train.
Found dead in a nearby alley, sexually assaulted, shot in the chest.
And the ballistics confirmed the absolute worst. She had been shot with the same .25 caliber weapon that linked all the previous victims.
The killer was still active while the presumed killer was in jail. What was the immediate fallout?
It was undeniable proof they had the wrong man. The humiliation for the LAPD was intense and public.
It confirmed the family's worst fears, that the police were rushing, that they were willing to arrest a convenient local suspect without having airtight proof.
And Mary Lowe was found only 3.5 blocks from where Bernita Sparks had been discovered. It just underscored the killer's confidence in that specific area.
So Spencer and Pinckney were released.
They were. The task force was back to square one, having wasted immense resources and, even worse, having given the true killer the psychological green light to keep going.
It also tells you something chilling about the killer himself. He must have seen the news that they'd arrested the Southside Slayer.
It's highly probable.
And then he kills again, likely within days, proving he's still out there and the police are completely lost. This murder was almost a mocking declaration of his freedom.
It shows he was aware of the media coverage and used it to assert his control and expose their failure. This sequence, the false hope, then the Mary Lowe murder, it just destroyed the already fragile trust between the community and the LAPD.
That investigative collapse led right into one of the most pivotal moments of the whole case, the emergence of the first known surviving victim.
November 1988. 4 years after the first identified murder, Anitria Washington.
And she provided the police with the one piece of evidence they desperately needed, an eyewitness account.
Her survival changed everything. It moved the investigation from just ballistics analysis to having a real, tangible witness.
So Anitria, a physician's assistant, was walking home to change for a party.
And she was approached by a man driving a very distinct vehicle for that neighborhood, an orange Pinto.
She stopped to admire the car. He offered her a ride to her friend's house, which was just a short distance away. But things got unsettling very quickly.
They did. She tried to give him directions, but he deliberately turned the wrong way. And then, chillingly, he started calling her Brenda.
She knew right then she was in danger. But not just that he had mistaken her for someone else.
Maybe a previous victim or someone he planned to target. She demanded to be let out of the car.
And the attack began immediately. He shot her in the chest, close range, with a .25. She lost consciousness.
When she woke up, it was dark. Her clothes had been pulled down, and he was on top of her doing something terrifyingly specific.
He was taking photographs.
Yes. And this detail, the photography, is where the case truly deepens. It moves the killer out of the category of a simple rage murderer and into someone with a ritualistic, trophy-taking compulsion.
Let's just pause on that image. To survive that, to wake up wounded, only to realize the killer is taking time not just to finish the assault, but to document it.
That shift from violence to ritual is terrifying. It suggests a level of premeditation far beyond an opportunist.
But she fought him off, broke free, was shoved out of the car, and left for dead.
Despite a gunshot wound to the chest, a collapsed lung, Anitria Washington's will to live was immense. She walked 1.5 kilometers, leaving a blood trail all the way to her friend's house.
Her survival was miraculous, but the initial response she got from law enforcement was almost as shocking as the attack itself.
It was. When emergency teams arrived, Anitria overheard police officers questioning why they should even help this black woman, assuming she must have been a prostitute because of her short skirt.
Just an immediate, terrible demonstration of this institutional prejudice.
The first instinct was to dismiss her. It wasn't until a more seasoned investigator arrived, noticed her ribs slip, and realized she had been raped, that they secured the scene for evidence.
At the hospital, they removed the .25 caliber bullet from her chest. And while she recovered, they finally got what they never had before, a description.
Anitri described the attacker as small, black, wearing a polo shirt and khakis. A generic description, really. The problem was the only unique detail was the orange Pinto.
But the ballistics confirmed it. The bullet from her body was from the same .25 caliber weapon used in the 9 previous murders.
She was the first survivor, and her testimony was considered invaluable.
So the investigation focused intensely on the Pinto.
They tracked down the owners of every orange Pinto in the Los Angeles area, a painstaking, methodical process. But every single owner was excluded.
And Anitria provided one more lead, a house the attacker drove past where he stopped and spoke to someone.
The house was owned by a man named Osis White. It was known as a local party house. Police got a warrant, and hope surged again when they found a .25 automatic weapon inside.
Another ghost lead.
Another one. Tests proved it was not the murder weapon. And what's more, Anitria described the attacker as being around 30. Osis White was in his late 70s. It was another dead end.
This pattern of almost catches and frustrating near misses just continued, leading to the highly publicized Ricky Ross diversion.
This happened near the Harbor Freeway, where 3 women has recently been killed with a 9mm weapon shortly before Anitria's attack.
And a police officer pulls over a car, and the driver turns out to be Ricky Ross, a Los Angeles sheriff's deputy.
He was with a prostitute and had a 9mm pistol in his trunk. He also admitted to owning a .25 caliber weapon, though it was never found.
Given the location of the 9mm murders, a cop with a prostitute and a gun, this was a massive scandal.
Huge. Ross was initially charged with the 3 9mm murders, and police suspected he might be the Southside Slayer too. The media ran with it.
But the case against him just collapsed.
It did. During his trial for the 9mm murders, independent ballistics experts concluded the 9mm from his trunk was most likely not the murder weapon.
Which also eliminated him as a suspect for the .25 caliber killings.
And the sheer scale of the resources wasted. Chasing the van, arresting Spencer, the Pinto canvas, and then this politically charged investigation into Ross, it left the task force completely exhausted and no closer to the truth.
2 major investigative pursuits, Spencer and Ross, and both led absolutely nowhere. The real killer remained untouchable.
The attack on Anitria, Washington in November 1988 was the last confirmed incident linked to that .25 caliber pistol for a very long time.
A 4-year murder series just came to a sudden halt.
And this dormant period, which stretched for 13 years, is what earned the killer his later, more famous nickname, the Grim Sleeper.
At the time, though, investigators had 2 main theories as to why the violence stopped.
The first was that he simply stopped. Maybe he aged out, got locked up for something minor and unrelated, or his life circumstances changed, got married, moved away.
And the second, more terrifying theory,
that he had just changed his MO and his weapon, swapped the easily identifiable .25 for something else, which would ensure that any new crimes wouldn't be linked back to the Southside Slayer series.
Regardless of the reason, the police just ran out of leads. They'd followed every trace, every witness, every tip, and all of it led to dead ends.
And here, the context of the overwhelmed city comes back as the final nail in the coffin.
Los Angeles continued to experience extreme violence. Over 1,000 murders a year through the 90s. The LAPD was perpetually overtaxed.
The budget, the staffing, the focus, it all shifted to the immediate ongoing catastrophe.
So the older, colder cases like the .25 caliber victims were just pushed out of view. The investigators on the task force were forced to focus on the immediate violence, and the possibility of solving the pattern killings diminished daily.
And the source material is very clear on the end result. The Southside Slayer Task Force officially disbanded in 1989.
The cases went stone cold. The files were just shuffled into storage.
This confirmed the worst fears of the families. The frustration just solidified into this terrible belief that the police had tried, failed, and ultimately just stopped caring.
Their loved ones became statistics in a larger, neglected crisis, and the killer vanished back into the community he had terrorized.
The long-term trauma of that is just unimaginable. Henrietta Wright's daughter talks about learning at age 8 that her mother was killed by a serial killer, and the difficulty she had for decades asking what actually happened.
The families live in fear and doubt for decades, knowing a man who killed their mother or sister or daughter was still walking free, maybe seeing them on the street.
And that 13-year period of silence, the sleep, it became the chilling marker for this case. It defined its legacy and obscured the intense, frantic, yet ultimately failed police work of the 80s.
So what does this initial deep dive really reveal? We started with a series of murders defined by a single .25 caliber pistol in the heart of the crack epidemic.
And the investigation, while intensely conducted by a dedicated few, was just constantly hampered by the sheer volume of violence, the dead ends like Spencer and Ross.
And the overriding social context that tragically marginalized the victims.
The core takeaway here is that the desperate need to find a killer led investigators to focus on these weak leads. It shows that even when the system tried to care, institutional bias and exhaustion skewed their focus,
Turning promising avenues into public humiliations and wasting critical time.
the systemic neglect of a vulnerable population created a silent, undisturbed opportunity for a predator to kill at will.
It took nearly 39 years from the start of the killings to the eventual closure of this case, primarily because society and the investigative apparatus failed to see the worth of these lives in time.
Before we leave you, I want to return to that powerful concept of invisibility. The source material ends with this chilling detail from a witness who recalled the height of the killing spree.
The woman on the bus.
She noticed a man who constantly sat with her on the bus. He'd sit near her for long stretches, but he never got off where she did.
Think about that. In an environment defined by social and investigative neglect, the killer wasn't necessarily sleeping or hiding in the shadows.
He was actively invisible, just living among the people he hunted. A familiar face on the bus, another person blending into the background of a chaotic, overwhelmed city.
It took decades for society to finally look closely enough to see the man who was in plain sight all along.
So what does it take for society to finally see the invisible?
That's our question for you today. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.